Welcome to Sacred Stories, Everyday Lives. I am Adeline St. Clair. There are stories in Scripture that we read with the ending already in mind, and in doing so, we deprive ourselves of the full weight of the message. The story of Peter is one of them. We know that Peter becomes the rock upon which the early church is built. We know that he preaches on the day of Pentecost. We know that his letters are preserved in the canon of Scripture. We carry the ending with us whenever we read the beginning, and that foreknowledge insulates us from the full gravity of what happened in a courtyard one cold night in Jerusalem. This episode is an invitation to set the ending aside for a while, to enter the story at the place where Peter himself had to live in, without any guarantee of how it would resolve. To sit with the man who was called a rock and watch him shatter. And then to stay long enough to witness what Jesus did in the aftermath, which is, in many ways, the most searched passage in all four of the Gospels. What Peter's story ultimately tells us is not simply that failure is forgivable. It tells us something far more precise. That Jesus knew the failure was coming, watched it happen, and had already determined what he would do on the other side of it. The restoration was not a response to Peter's recovery. It was an intention Jesus had carried all along. That is worth sitting with slowly. To understand the magnitude of what Peter did in that courtyard, we must first understand who Peter was and who Jesus had declared him to be. His given name was Simon, the son of John. He was a fisherman from the northern region of Galilee, a working man of considerable physical presence and almost no capacity for restraint. He was the first to speak and the first to act, and neither speech nor action was ever particularly measured, just as many of us still do today. He was the disciple who leapt from the boat to walk on water, who swung a sword in the Garden of Gethsemane, who followed Jesus into the high priest's courtyard when all the others had already fled. He was, in every sense of the word, a man who threw himself entirely into whatever he was doing, with all the courage and all the vulnerability that complete commitment entails. And it was Peter who answered the question that defined the ministry of Jesus. You are the Messiah, the Son of the living God. Jesus received that confession as one of the pivotal moments of his earthly ministry. He told Peter that this recognition had not come from human wisdom, but from the Father. And then he gave Simon a new name. And I tell you that you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of Hades will not overcome it. Peter, the rock. The name was not merely a title of affection. It was a declaration of purpose and destiny. Jesus was announcing what Peter would become. He was speaking the man's future identity over him in the present tense, before Peter had done anything to earn or demonstrate it. And yet, in the very next passage, Peter rebuked Jesus for predicting his own suffering and death. He took Jesus aside and said, with all the well-meaning presumption of a man who loved Jesus and understood almost nothing about what he was saying, "This will never happen to you." And Jesus had to say some of the sharpest words in the Gospels in return. That tension between Peter's genuine love and his genuine limitation runs through every encounter he has with Jesus. He was sincerely devoted. He was also sincerely unaware of how much of himself he had not yet seen. And that unawareness is precisely what made the night ahead so devastating. It was the night of Passover, and Jesus gathered his disciples for what would be their last meal together before his death, though only Jesus knew that was what it was. Jesus washed their feet, including the feet of the man who would betray him and the man who would deny him. He performed this act of service and love with full knowledge of what each of them would do before morning. He broke bread with them. He told them to love one another as he had loved them. He gave them everything he had to give. And then, at the table, he said something that landed like a stone in still water. "This very night, you will all fall away on account of me. For it is written, 'I will strike the shepherd, and the sheep of the flock will be scattered.'" All of them. Every man at that table, before the night was over, would fall away. Peter received this not as a warning to be heeded, but as a challenge to be met. What he said next was not arrogance. It was the declaration of a man who genuinely believed what he was saying, spoken from a place of deep and sincere love. "Even if all fall away on account of you, I never will. Even if all, I never will." You see, Peter had walked with Jesus for 3 years. He had left his livelihood, his home, his former life. He had seen the miracles and heard the teaching and stood on the Mount of Transfiguration and witnessed things that no other human being had witnessed. He loved Jesus with a love that was, by any measure, extraordinary. And in that love, he was utterly certain of his own capability. Jesus did not correct the love, he corrected his certainty. "Truly I tell you," Jesus answered, "this very night, before the rooster crows, you will disown me 3 times. Before the rooster crows. Not eventually, not someday, not under extreme and prolonged pressure. Tonight, before morning light. Peter would not receive it. He said with even greater insistence that he would die before he would disown Jesus, and the other disciples said the same. However, none of them knew themselves as well as they believed they did. That is not a condemnation. It is simply the truth about human beings under conditions they have never faced before. We do not know what we will do in the dark until we are actually in the dark. And Peter was about to find out. After the meal, Jesus led his disciples to a garden called Gethsemane on the slopes of the Mount of Olives. He took Peter and James and John deeper into the garden with him, and he did something that those 3 men had almost certainly never seen before. He showed them his distress. He told them his soul was overwhelmed with sorrow to the point of death. He asked them to keep watch while he prayed, and then he went a little further and fell on his knees and prayed the most searching prayer in the New Testament. "My Father, if it is possible, may this cup be taken from me. Yet not as I will, but as you will." When he returned, he found Peter and the others asleep. He woke them and asked them to keep watch, and he prayed again. He returned. They were asleep again. 3 times he prayed. 3 times he found them sleeping. He did not rebuke them harshly. He said, with a gentleness that is almost harder to read than anger would have been, "The spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak." He was describing himself as much as them. And then, the torchlight appeared at the edge of the garden. A large crowd sent from the chief priests and elders, carrying swords and clubs. And with them, Judas Iscariot, who had already made his arrangement, walked directly to Jesus and greeted him with a kiss, the prearranged signal. And the soldiers moved forward to arrest him. It was Peter who reacted. Without calculation, without hesitation, with every ounce of the fierce protectiveness that had always been his defining characteristic, he drew a sword and struck the servant of the high priest, cutting off his ear. Peter was, at that moment, the only person in the garden willing to fight. He was ready to die. It was a form of reckless, ungoverned love. But Jesus told him to put the sword away. He said that those who live by the sword will die by it. He said that 12 legions of angels were available to him if he wanted them, and that he was choosing not to call them. He healed the servant's ear, and he allowed himself to be taken. And in that moment, the disciples were faced with the reality that Jesus was not going to resist. They were faced with soldiers and weapons and the certainty of arrest, and they made the only calculation their fear allowed them to make. Then all the disciples deserted him and fled. All of them, including the man who had promised just hours earlier that he would die before he would leave. Peter did not go far, though. He ran, but something pulled him back. Whatever had driven him from the garden was overcome, partially, by the thing that had always characterized him most. He had to know what was going to happen. He loved Jesus too much to simply disappear into the night. And so, he followed, at a distance, cautiously, to the courtyard of the high priest, where Jesus was being held for questioning. It was cold. Someone had built a charcoal fire in the middle of the courtyard, and a group of servants and officials were standing around it, warming themselves. Peter joined them. He stood in the firelight with the very people who had arrested Jesus, holding his hands out to the same warmth, and waited. He had been there only a short while when the first accusation came. Not from a soldier, not from a member of the Sanhedrin. A servant girl looked at him in the firelight and said, to no one in particular, "This man was with Jesus of Galilee." A servant girl, the lowest social rank in that courtyard. And Peter, who had drawn a sword against an armed crowd in a garden only hours before, turned to her and said, "I don't know what you're talking about." He moved away from the fire, toward the gateway, as though distance from the accusation would make it less true. Then another servant girl saw him there, and said to the people nearby, "This fellow was with Jesus of Nazareth." This time, Peter added an oath. An oath was a formal invocation of divine witness, a declaration that God himself could attest to the truth of what was being said. Peter swore before God that he did not know the man. About an hour passed. The night deepened. The fire burned lower, and a group of bystanders came to Peter. They were more persistent than the servant girls. They said, "It is obvious who you are. Your accent gives you away. You are a Galilean. You were with him." And Peter, standing at the edge of that courtyard, with the sound of Jesus' interrogation somewhere nearby, reached for the strongest language available to him. He began to call down curses, and he swore to them angrily, "I don't know the man." He called down curses on himself. Why? He was invoking divine punishment if he was lying, the most extreme form of oath available in his culture. He was not merely saying he did not know Jesus. He was asking God to destroy him if the claim was false. 3 denials, one for every promise at the table, one for every sleeping disciple in the garden. 3 times, in front of witnesses, before a fire, in the same city where Jesus was being tried for his life. And at that exact moment, the text is precise about this. A rooster crowed. Luke's account includes a single detail that the other Gospel writers do not record. It is a detail that is shattering. The Lord turned and looked straight at Peter. Jesus was somewhere in that courtyard, being moved between hearings, under guard, having spent the night enduring the questions and the mockery and the violence that the other Gospel writers describe in detail. And in the moment the rooster crowed, he turned and looked straight at Peter. The text offers no description of that look. It does not tell us whether it was a look of grief or compassion or simple recognition. It does not tell us how long it lasted, or whether Peter held it or turned away. It tells us only that it happened, and that in the moment it happened, then Peter remembered the word the Lord had spoken to him. "Before the rooster crows today, you will disown me 3 times." He remembered the specific moment at the table when Jesus had looked at him and said, "Before morning, 3 times." And he had said, "Never." And Jesus had not argued with him. He simply told him the truth, and Peter had refused to receive it. And now the rooster was crowing, and the words of Jesus were landing in him with the full weight they had carried all along. There is a particular quality of devastation that belongs to this kind of moment. It is not simply the pain of failure. It is the pain of having been told the truth in advance and refusing to believe it, and then finding yourself on the other side of the refusal, standing in exactly the place you were warned about. Peter had not only denied Jesus 3 times, he had denied Jesus 3 times while Jesus watched. That look across the courtyard was not an accusation. It was a witness. And it was a reminder, not merely that Peter had done what he said he would never do, but that Jesus had known it was coming and had come to supper with him anyway and washed his feet anyway and included him in everything anyway. And he went outside and wept bitterly. He went outside, not toward his home, not toward his fishing boat, not toward any comfort or any familiar thing. He went outside, away from the fire and the courtyard and the soldiers and the proceedings inside, and he wept bitterly. The adverb matters. This was not the quiet grief of a man who was disappointed in himself. This was the grief of a man who had shattered under pressure and knew it, who had been seen in the shattering by the very person he had promised to protect, and who had no framework yet for what any of this meant, or whether there was any way back from it. Between the courtyard and the resurrection, Peter disappears from the narrative. He is present at the crucifixion, watching at a distance. He runs to the empty tomb on Easter morning. But the inner life of those days, what Peter was living with, what he was telling himself, how he was holding the weight of what he had done, is not recorded. We are left to imagine it. What we can say with some confidence is this: Peter was not simply feeling guilty. Guilt and shame are related but distinct experiences. Guilt is the recognition that one has done something wrong. It is painful, but it is oriented toward a specific action and is therefore, in principle, addressable. It can be confessed, atoned for, forgiven. Shame is something different. Shame is the conviction there is something wrong with you. It does not attach to a specific act so much as to you committing the act. And it tends to produce not confession, but concealment. Not the desire to be restored, but the belief that restoration is no longer available or deserved. Peter had not merely committed a sin. He had become, in the space of a single night, the exact person he had publicly promised never to be. The man who had said he would die before he would leave had left. The man who had been named a rock had fractured at the question of a servant girl. The gap between who Peter had believed himself to be and who he had revealed himself to be was so wide that ordinary guilt was insufficient to contain it. What Peter was carrying in those days was shame. And then the resurrection changed everything. Or rather, it began to. When the angel appeared at the empty tomb and gave Mary Magdalene the message for the disciples, the message included a specific and remarkable addition. But go, tell his disciples and Peter that he is going ahead of you into Galilee. There you will see him, just as he told you. And Peter? 2 words that carry the weight of a deliberate pastoral intention. The disciples were named as a group. Peter was named separately, specifically, by the risen Jesus through his angel. Jesus knew Peter would need to hear his name, that the shame Peter was carrying would tell him he had been excised from the community of the disciples, that the failure had placed him outside the circle. And the message from the empty tomb was a direct dismissal of that lie. You are still included. He is going ahead of you. Peter was included as he had been before. After the resurrection, Jesus appeared to his disciples on multiple occasions over 40 days. One of those appearances, the one recorded in the final chapter of John's Gospel, is structured around a conversation between Jesus and Peter that is, in the judgment of many careful readers, the most searched act of pastoral restoration in all of Scripture. Peter had returned to Galilee. He had gone back to fishing, whether from necessity or from the simple need to be doing something familiar while he waited for something he did not yet fully understand, or from the particular despair of a man who is not sure he still belongs in the story he left behind. He went out on the water that night and caught nothing. At dawn, a figure appeared on the shore and called out to them, telling them to cast the net on the right side of the boat. They obeyed, and the net filled with fish so quickly and so completely that they could not haul it in. It was John who recognized him first, and it was Peter who, upon hearing John say, "It is the Lord," wrapped his outer garment around himself and jumped into the water. Even now, even in the full weight of what he had done and what he had not done, even carrying the memory of that courtyard and that fire and that look across the crowd, Peter moved toward Jesus. That impulse, the impulse to move toward rather than away, even after catastrophic failure, is perhaps the most instructive thing about Peter's character. He did not wait for assurance that he would be received. He did not compose himself or prepare an apology or delay until he had something worthy to offer. He jumped into the water. He let everything else fall away. And they had breakfast together on the shore by a charcoal fire. The same kind of fire Peter had stood beside in the courtyard. The same kind of warmth. When they had finished eating, Jesus said to Simon Peter, "Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these?" Simon, son of John, not Peter, the given name, the name before the commission, the name of the fisherman before he became the rock. Jesus was meeting him exactly where the failure had left him, without the weight of the new name, without the expectations that name carried, simply as the man he was. Do you love me more than these? More than the fish? More than the boat? More than the life you have returned to while you waited? More than the others at this table who also deserted me? Peter said yes. Jesus said, "Feed my lambs." And a second time, "Do you love me?" Peter said yes. Jesus said, "Take care of my sheep." Then a third time, and here the text tells us something significant. Peter was hurt because Jesus asked him a third time. He understood what the three questions meant. He understood that he was being walked back through the three denials, that each question was occupying the space of an answer that had failed, that Jesus was giving him 3 new moments to replace the 3 broken ones. And from that place of hurt, from that place of full recognition of what was being done and why it was necessary, Peter gave the most honest answer he would ever give. "Lord, you know all things. You know that I love you." Peter was no longer making claims about what he was capable of, or what he would never do, or how his love surpassed that of the others. He had arrived on the far side of his most catastrophic failure, at the one place that failure always drives us, if we let it. The place of utter transparency before the only one who already knows. You know all things. You know that I love you. I am not asking you to take my word for it, because my word has already proven inadequate. I am simply pointing to what you can already see. I am asking you to look and tell me what is there. And Jesus said, "Feed my sheep." 3 questions answered, 3 denials addressed, 3 new commissions given in the place of 3 broken promises. And then, With the same simplicity with which it had all begun, Jesus said, "Follow me." The first call and the restored call were the same call. The man who had been named a rock and had cracked was being called again, not despite the cracking, but through it, as someone who now knew from the inside, irreversibly, what he was and what he was not, and what the grace of Jesus was capable of when it encountered a human being at the very bottom of himself. Peter went on to become one of the central pillars of the early church. He preached on the day of Pentecost, and 3,000 people were added to the community of believers in a single day. He traveled, he led, he suffered, he wrote. The letters attributed to him are marked by a particular quality of pastoral honesty about suffering and failure and the endurance that faith requires. They read, in many places, like the writing of a man who has been in the fire and knows what it actually costs to stand in it. And none of that would have been possible without the courtyard. Or rather, more precisely, none of it would have been possible in the same way. Peter could have served the early church without having denied Jesus. He could have been courageous and effective and faithful without that particular failure. But he could not have become the specific kind of leader the early church needed, the kind who knew shame from the inside, who knew the weight of the unresolved question of whether you were still included, who knew what it was like to be met on the shore by the person you had failed and given breakfast and asked a simple question, without having passed through what he passed through. There is a difference between a person who has never broken and a person who has been broken and restored. The first kind of person has a particular kind of strength. The second kind of person has something that the first kind cannot offer. The specific credibility of someone who has been exactly where you are and came back to tell you that the way out of it is through it, and that the one waiting on the other side is not a judge, but a cook on a beach with a fire going and fish on the grill and a question ready. Shame tells us that our worst moment defines us. Peter's story does not simply dispute that. It demonstrates the alternative with precision and at length. Jesus knew what Peter would do before Peter did it. He knew it at the Mount of Transfiguration. He knew it when he washed Peter's feet. He knew it when he served Peter the bread and the cup. He knew it every time Peter made his declarations of undying loyalty. And he never once used that knowledge against him. He let Peter discover his own limits. He watched Peter fall. He sent Peter his name in the angel's message. He made breakfast on the shore. He gave Peter 3 questions for 3 denials. And he said, "Follow me." You see, the restoration was not an afterthought. It was a plan. There is a fire on the shore for you too. Whatever the courtyard was in your life, whatever the moment of failure that you have been measuring yourself against, whatever the promise you made with complete sincerity and could not keep, whatever the look you cannot forget across whatever the distance, The story of Peter is not offered to you as a comfort that minimizes what happened. It is offered as evidence that the person who knows what happened, who was there and witnessed it, and has been watching you carry it ever since, has not changed his intention toward you. The question he is asking today is not whether you deserve to be restored. It is not whether your failure was too significant or too public, or precisely the opposite of who you claimed to be. The question is the same one he asked by the water in the early morning, over a fire, to the most publicly broken disciple he had. Do you love me? Not, can you prove it? Not, have you sufficiently accounted for what you did? Not, do you understand what your failure cost me? It is, do you love me? Bring your honest answer. Bring the broken version of yourself, the way Peter brought himself, pointing to what Jesus already knew, rather than asserting what Peter could no longer claim. Bring whatever you actually have, not what you wish you had, and then listen for what comes after your answer. Feed my sheep and follow me. Your mission is restored in the same breath as the love is received. Not eventually, not after a sufficient period of rehabilitation, but in the same breath. And that is what grace is. Not the absence of the courtyard, but the fire on the shore after it. Thank you for spending this time with me today. May these sacred stories continue to meet you in the ordinary moments of your life, especially in those moments when the weight of what you have done feels heavier than what you believe is possible. You are not outside the circle. You never were. If this story touched your heart, it would bless us deeply if you would leave a like. And if there is someone in your life who is carrying a courtyard of their own, someone who needs to hear that the fire on the shore is still burning for them, do not hesitate to share this episode with them. That single act of faithfulness may be more significant than you know. We would love to hear from you in the comments. Share what this story stirred in you. Your testimony is a gift to this community, and it may be the very thing that helps someone else take a step toward Christ. If you would like to continue in this story, our free Bible study for this episode is linked in the description below. Take it slowly. Use the hashtag SSEL Bible Study to share your reflections and to find others walking through it alongside you. Subscribe if you would like to hear more stories like this one. New episodes are shared every other Sunday, 7 in the morning Eastern Standard Time and noon Greenwich Mean Time. May God bless you and keep you. I hope to see you again